have someone very, very special who will be introducing one of our honored guest. And so, without further ado, let's just get right down to it.
Let me say this to you first. Before we go any further, you graciously and generously introduced me as an actor. Yeah, I was in 26 films and several television series.
Wow.
But I wouldn't call that acting.
You would not.
I was always playing myself, so that was easy.
Yourself.
So that was not a challenge. But
welcome. So glad to have you back again.
My
I love
pleasure.
the colors. That's
really
great.
Well, appreciate that.
Yeah.
It was this or a T-shirt, so you know.
Well, I always get like a little nervous. I'm never nervous, but I'm a little nervous when you come on because all I do is I'm just like, what, Larry Carroll? Because you have done so much, and when I try to follow your history and all that you've done, it's just there's so much to talk about each time you come on.
I can wear you out with it. but this week, I really appreciate your theme because it's not about me at all. This week in Las Vegas, we are hosting an amazing and historic group, the Tuskegee Airmen. The Tuskegee Airmen are here for their annual convention. They've been here before. They've been here, well, in a sense, throughout their history, and you're going to hear about that when we introduce our special guest today.
Very special guest.
But these are gentlemen. There were 16,000 of them when what was known as the Tuskegee experiment started in the early 40s in the World War II, when they realized they didn't have enough people to run an air force. And thanks to people like, Eleanor Roosevelt among them.
Can you imagine?
Who stood up when no one else would and said, yes, black men are intelligent enough to fly airplanes. In fact, they can do anything they choose to do, and we need them in the war effort. And her influence had a lot to do with the creation of what was known as the Tuskegee experiment. And they really did characterize it as an experiment when ultimately as many as 16,000 men from all over the country decided that they had won their fight, or they had to fight for the right to fight for their country. At a time when we were fighting fascism overseas and racism at home, these men stood forward and stepped forward to fight two wars at once. And it is undeniable that they won both of them. And so we honor their service. My father was one of them. He was in class 44H, and I have a commemorative bomber jacket that has all the patches of all of the squadrons that were part of the Tuskegee force in Europe.
You can go to Facebook, everybody, to see that jacket.
Yeah.
It looks great on you. You wear it well, by the way.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
And it has he signed it before he passed in 2005 with his class 45H. And he left the Air Force as a second lieutenant and a bomber pilot. He flew B-25s. He didn't see service, but he didn't see combat service, let me say that. But a fella he was very, very well acquainted with at the air base at Tuskegee, who was a buddy of his, and ultimately became his brother-in-law, did see service. Flew the fastest, most maneuverable, most awesome fighter plane in the sky in World War II, the vaunted P-51. And that gentleman is our guest today. But when I wear that jacket, it's amazing the reaction I get. I was in a casino in Henderson a couple of years ago, and it was wintertime, so it was a bulky jacket, and I wore my Tuskegee jacket into the casino, and a guy I didn't know walked up to me and said, "Are you an airman?" I said, no, I'm way too young. This jacket commemorates my father's service in World War II. He says, well, I got to tell you, I owe so much to you and to your father. I said, what are you talking about? He says, well, my dad was a bomber pilot in World War II, and if it hadn't been for the Red Tails was the nickname for the squadron of fighter pilots, black fighter pilots, who flew escort coverage for our bomber missions over Germany. He said, if it hadn't been for the Red Tails, my dad would not have lived. He would not have survived World War II. He saved my dad. They saved my dad's life.
Wow, what a story.
He bought me a drink in the casino. I'm like, wow, this is incredible.
It is.
We have a national legacy. We have a group, a class of national heroes that diminishes every year because that was some time ago, and these guys are in their 90s. And they are still heroes, and they will forever be heroes. And so George Lucas, a few years ago, produced a film that is iconic and that really tells the story of the Tuskegee Airmen and what they had to confront domestically and what they had to confront overseas. So if you ever see somebody with a hat like this, says Red Tails, go to Netflix, go to Hulu, go wherever you got to go see this movie. It's called Red Tails, and it's the story of the Tuskegee Airmen. And the gentleman you're about to meet was one of the technical advisors to that film because he was one of those red tail flyers. Their service was so remarkable. The lore is, and you'll be able to ask him about this, but the lore is that the United States never lost a bomber over Germany if the Red Tails were escorting them. Now, that isn't entirely true, but that's the lore. It's almost true. In fact, their record for protecting our bombers on their runs over Germany, which played a major part in the Allied victory over Nazi Germany, was exemplary and beyond any other that had been recorded up until that time and probably since. And because of that, and their place in history, in 2006, the Tuskegee Airmen were awarded this medal. It is the Congressional Gold Medal presented to them in Washington, D.C. by President Bush. This one happens to be the one that was presented to my father posthumously.
The Congressional Gold Medal.
That's the Congressional Gold Medal, and it was presented to the Tuskegee Airmen as a group. And this is supposed to stand up nicely here so we can
well,
present it.
Well, I'll tell you, Larry, that you talk about speechless. I'm speechless just to actually be able to sit here and see that. That's pretty cute to see that. To see this gold medal right here given to, it was President Bush, right?
Right.
Okay, given to the Tuskegee Airmen, and to know that we actually have one of the original fighters right here with us.
Absolutely.
And not only that, but you're very, well, you actually told the story in a very, very modest way, but the fact that your dad was a lieutenant in the Air Force, and now this is your uncle.
That's right.
Who we are speaking of, who was an actual fighter. And
fighter pilot. My dad was a bomber pilot. My uncle's a fighter pilot. Yes,
incredible.
It is.
Incredible.
I mean, I have a wonderful a wonderful background and some men who are heroes in my life and role models that can't be matched. I gotta say, I'm very, very proud of them. In last year, there was a book published, and if you want some more background, you might want to pick up this. It's called The Last Veterans of World War II, and it includes the stories of a number of men several of whom have died since publication of this, but whose stories are epic and whose stories really tell the personal sacrifice that Americans made to win that war. And among those in that book is a whole section on our guest today, Lieutenant Colonel George E. Hardy. I want you to have an opportunity, if you can, to go out and pick up a copy of The Last Veterans of World War II, and you'll hear and see more
picture. Stunning.
about
Stunning. And the story, his story is incredible. You know what? We can only do so much in terms of honoring within this amount of time, because just as we have a series going on with you, because your legacy is like this, his is like triple.
Yes, multiples.
And in just learning and reading and studying, I don't know what to say as far as all that he has done and has squeezed in a lifetime.
Absolutely.
We're talking about 3 wars, basically.
Oh yeah.
And it's just...
He's in World War II, Korea, and even Vietnam. And he's done so much in between those wars, and since he spends his time these days, traveling the country, indeed the world, talking to people, and a lot of kids, talking to a lot of kids, and people who appreciate and recognize the contributions that the Tuskegee Airmen represent.
Absolutely.
And it's a wonderful, wonderful story. And in a minute, you're going to get to meet him.
All right. Well, and just briefly, I want to do this also because your dad, just tell us a little bit about him as well, because I think that needs to be just, people need to know about a little bit about your dad.
My dad was an exemplary human being, and no one can think of my dad, who was Larry Carroll Jr., I'm the third, without smiling. He left the Air Force just as the Korean War was starting, and it's mainly my fault because I was just coming into the world, and they gave him a pass. But his career path was in law. He became an attorney, and in fact was the first black attorney hired by the Chicago Title and Trust Company. His specialty was real estate in Chicago, Illinois. He grew in that position to become chief title officer of Chicago Title and Trust Company, which, as I mentioned a moment ago, is a pretty big deal when it's a title company, your chief title officer. But in 1982, he was appointed Cook County Circuit Court judge in the wake of a judicial corruption scandal in Chicago known as Graylord. And it always gives me chills to recall that they were searching high and low for an honest man to take a position on the bench in Cook County, and they had the wisdom to select my dad, Lawrence Carroll, and he served on the bench of Cook County Circuit Court until his retirement. And he's a role model to many, not just me, and was a great guy whose legacy will live on for quite a while.
I just think thank you for sharing with us, because it's all in the family.
Oh, it is.
It's all in the family. And so as we prepare to introduce this part of history, this gentleman who has made history,
Absolutely.
I think that all of the history needs to be told.
Absolutely.
So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen of the Variety Talk family, we're going to take a quick station break. When we come back, we will have the opportunity to introduce to you retired Second Lieutenant Colonel George.
No. Lieutenant Colonel.
Lieutenant Colonel.
Yes.
Not second.
No.
Lieutenant Colonel. There
Yes.
we go. George. You see, that's why I was nervous. I wanted to make sure I got everything right. Lieutenant Colonel George E. Hardy, United States Air Force, 99th Fighter Squadron. We'll be right back.